It was one of those mornings where everything that could go wrong already had. She had woken up late, spilled coffee on her shirt, changed it in a rush, and somehow still managed to get herself and her 2 kids, a 5-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy, out the door and to the airport with just enough time to make it through security without missing their flight. She was a single mom, had been for almost 3 years now, and anyone who has done that job alone knows that traveling with small children is not a vacation. It is a mission. Her name was Lisa, and she was 34 years old, living in Columbus, Ohio, working 2 part-time jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. And this flight to visit her mother in California was the first trip she had taken in over 2 years. She had saved up for months. She had planned everything carefully, packed snacks, downloaded cartoons on her tablet, bought little activity books from the dollar store to keep her kids busy. She had thought of everything a mother thinks of when she is trying her absolute best. But the moment she stepped onto that plane, dragging a carry-on, a diaper bag slung over one shoulder, her son holding one hand and her daughter perched on her hip, she could feel the shift in the air, that quiet, invisible thing that happens when people on a packed flight spot a mother with young children walking down the aisle toward them. Some people looked away quickly. Some adjusted in their seats. A few gave those tight, polite smiles that don't actually mean anything. Lisa kept her chin up and kept moving, counting the row numbers under her breath. 11, 12, 13, until she found row 14, which was her row, her seats, the place where she and her children were supposed to sit for the next 5 hours. She shuffled in past the aisle seat, where a man in a crisp button-down shirt and pressed trousers was already seated, already settled, laptop open, noise-canceling headphones around his neck like he had done this 100 times and had absolutely zero interest in being disturbed. He glanced up when she arrived, looked at her, looked at the kids, and then let out a slow, long breath through his nose. The kind of breath that is not quite a sigh but is meant to be heard. Lisa pretended not to notice. She lifted her carry-on into the overhead bin, which took 2 tries because her daughter kept squirming in her arms. And when the bag finally clicked into place, she felt a small, private victory. She got her son settled into the window seat, buckled him in, handed him the tablet with his cartoon already queued up, then lowered herself into the middle seat with her daughter on her lap since she had only been able to afford 2 seats and her daughter was still small enough to sit that way for the flight. The man in the aisle seat shifted slightly, just enough to make it clear the space between them felt smaller to him now. Lisa tucked the diaper bag under the seat in front of her, pulled out a snack pouch for her daughter, and told herself what she always told herself in moments like this. Just keep going. You're doing fine. The kids are okay. You're okay. The plane began to fill around them, overhead bins slamming shut, people finding their seats, that low hum of 100 conversations happening at once. Her son pressed his nose against the window and whispered, "Mom, look at the clouds," even though they hadn't left the ground yet. And she leaned over to look with him and smiled a real smile, not the tight, polite kind. A real one. The kind only your kids can pull out of you when everything else is chaos. Her daughter was already pulling at the snack pouch, happy and distracted. And for a moment, one small, quiet moment, Lisa thought, maybe this is going to be okay. Maybe it's going to be a good trip. Maybe the 5 hours would pass smoothly, and the kids would sleep, and she would finally exhale. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes for just a second. The cabin doors closed. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. And the man in 14B, without looking at her, reached over and very deliberately moved his elbow to claim the entire shared armrest. A small thing. The kind of thing most people would not even notice. But Lisa noticed, and somehow she knew, deep in that tired, worn-out part of her chest, that the next 5 hours were not going to be as easy as she had hoped. The plane lifted off the ground smoothly. And for the first 10 minutes or so, things were actually fine. Her son was locked into his cartoon, earbuds in, completely in his own little world, the way only a 7-year-old can be. Her daughter had finished her snack and was sitting quietly on Lisa's lap, playing with a small soft toy she had pulled from the diaper bag, turning it over in her tiny hands with that focused, serious expression that toddlers get when they are genuinely entertained. Lisa had her seatbelt fastened, her water bottle wedged in the seat pocket, and she was just starting to feel that first small wave of relief, the kind that only comes when you realize the hardest part might actually be behind you, when her daughter suddenly got tired of the toy. It happened the way it always happens with little kids. 1 second, they are perfectly content, and the next second they are done. Completely and totally done, and there is no negotiating with that. Her daughter dropped the toy, arched her back slightly, and let out a short, sharp cry. Not a full meltdown, not even close. Just the normal sound of a tired, slightly overstimulated toddler who had been held in one position for too long and needed a change. Lisa immediately reached into the bag, pulled out another snack, tried the toy again, started softly humming the little song her daughter liked, all the things mothers do automatically, the invisible and endless work of keeping a small person calm. But the man in the aisle seat turned his head. Not quickly, not with any alarm. He turned slowly, deliberately, the way someone turns when they want you to know they are looking. He glanced at the little girl, then at Lisa, and he made a sound. It was not a word, not exactly, just a low sound of irritation, like the noise someone makes when they step in a puddle or get stuck at a red light. Lisa kept her eyes forward and kept humming. Her daughter settled after a minute or two, leaning into Lisa's chest and starting to get drowsy, which was a relief. And Lisa thought maybe the moment had passed and the man had gone back to whatever was on his laptop screen. But she was wrong. About 20 minutes later, somewhere over the middle of the country, her daughter woke back up from her short doze, and this time she was not going quietly. She was tired and disoriented, and not happy about either of those things. And she started to cry, real crying this time, the kind with tears and that heartbreaking little trembling lip that makes every parent in the world want to fix things immediately. Lisa picked her up, adjusted her position, patted her back, spoke softly into her hair, offered the snack again, offered the toy again, offered everything she had in that bag. The people in the rows around her mostly understood. A few gave Lisa those gentle, sympathetic looks that parents give other parents. The ones that say, "We've been there, hang in there." But the man in the aisle seat had apparently decided he had been patient long enough. He closed his laptop, pulled his headphones fully off his ears, turned in his seat, and spoke. He did not whisper. He said, clearly and loudly enough for the rows around them to hear, that some people really needed to think ahead before deciding to drag small children onto a 5-hour flight. He said it like it was a reasonable thing to say, like it was simply an observation. Lisa felt her face go hot. She did not respond, just kept her hand on her daughter's back, kept her eyes on the seat in front of her, kept her voice low and steady, even though her hands had started to tremble slightly, not from anger, not exactly, but from the specific and awful feeling of being made to feel small in a public place, when you were already doing your absolute best. Her son had pulled one earbud out and was looking up at her with that searching, worried look that kids get when they sense something is wrong with their parent but don't fully understand what. She gave him a small smile and mouthed the word, "Fine," because the last thing she needed was for him to feel what she was feeling. Around them, a few passengers had gone quiet. One woman a row ahead glanced back briefly, then looked away. The flight attendants were at the back of the plane and had not heard. And the man in the aisle seat settled back in his seat with the satisfied expression of someone who felt he had said something that needed to be said, completely unbothered, while Lisa sat in the middle seat, holding her crying daughter, staring straight ahead, and quietly willing herself not to fall apart at 30,000 feet. The man in the window seat had not said a single word since the plane took off. He had been so quiet, so still, that Lisa had almost forgotten he was there. He was older, maybe late 50s or early 60s, with short gray hair and the kind of calm, steady posture that some people carry naturally, the kind that does not come from arrogance but from something deeper, something that has been built slowly over a long time. He had a book open in his lap, but had not turned a page in a while. He was not sleeping. He was simply sitting there, the way certain people sit in difficult moments, present, aware, watching without making it obvious that he was watching. Lisa had barely glanced at him during the whole flight. She had been too focused on her children, too caught up in the quiet humiliation of the last 20 minutes. Too busy holding herself together from the inside to pay much attention to the man by the window. But he had been paying attention. He had heard every word the man in the aisle seat said. He had watched Lisa's shoulders tighten and then stay tight. He had seen the way her son pulled out his earbud and looked up at his mother with worried eyes. And he had seen the way she smiled at that little boy and said, "Fine," even though nothing about the moment was fine. And somewhere in those few minutes, something in him had quietly made a decision. He closed his book. It was such a small movement, barely noticeable, just the soft sound of pages coming together. But Lisa heard it and glanced over without meaning to. The man was sitting forward slightly now, elbows on his knees, and he turned his head toward the aisle seat with the kind of unhurried, deliberate calm that immediately made the air in that row feel different. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a scene. He simply looked at the man in 14B and said, in a low and even tone, that it might be a good idea to dial things back. The man in the aisle seat blinked, clearly not expecting to be addressed at all, and then did what people like him often do when they are caught off guard. He got louder. He said something about how this was a public space, and he had every right to say what he felt. And he turned slightly in his seat to face the man by the window with the full confidence of someone who had never really been challenged before. He asked, with a short, dismissive laugh, who exactly this man thought he was. And that was the moment. The man by the window did not flinch, did not raise his voice, did not show a single flicker of irritation on his face. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, slowly, the way people move when they have absolutely nothing to prove, and he pulled out a small, worn leather wallet. He opened it and placed it on the tray table so the man in the aisle seat could see it clearly. It was his retired United States Air Force identification. The rank printed on it was Colonel. 28 years of service. The man in the aisle seat stared at it for a moment and said nothing. The colonel closed the wallet calmly and put it back in his pocket. And then he looked at the man directly and said, in that same quiet, steady voice, that he had spent nearly 3 decades serving this country alongside some of the toughest and most dedicated people he had ever known. And that this woman sitting right here, raising 2 children on her own and doing it without complaint, deserved more respect than she had received in the last half hour. He said it without drama, without anger, just clearly and simply, the way someone speaks when they mean every word and have no interest in arguing about it. The cabin had gone completely still. Not the uncomfortable, awkward silence from before, a different kind of silence, the kind that settles over a space when something true has just been said out loud and everyone in earshot knows it. The man in the aisle seat opened his mouth, then closed it again. He turned back to face forward, put his headphones back on, and did not say another word for the rest of the flight. Lisa sat in the middle seat with her daughter now calm and drowsy against her shoulder, and she turned to look at the man by the window. He was not looking for a reaction. He had already picked his book back up. But before he found his page, he glanced at her, just briefly, and gave her the smallest, quietest nod, the kind that said you didn't deserve that, and you're doing just fine. And Lisa, who had been holding it together so tightly for so long, had to press her lips together and look away before the tears she had been fighting for the last 20 minutes finally decided they had waited long enough. For a moment, nobody moved. The cabin held that strange, suspended quiet that follows something significant, the kind of stillness where everyone is processing what just happened, but nobody quite knows what to do next. Lisa kept her eyes forward, blinking slowly, her daughter warm and heavy against her chest, finally drifting towards sleep the way toddlers do after a big cry, all at once, like a lamp switching off. Her son had both earbuds out now and was sitting very still, looking up at the colonel with the wide, unguarded curiosity that only children have, the kind of look that asks 100 questions without saying a single word. Lisa gently reached over and tucked one earbud back into his ear, smoothing his hair with her hand the way she always did when she wanted him to feel settled. And he let her, leaning slightly into her touch before turning back to his cartoon. She exhaled slowly through her nose. Her hands had stopped trembling. The tight burning feeling in her chest was still there, but softer now, like a fist that had slowly begun to open. She did not know what to say to the man by the window. Thank you felt too small, and anything longer felt like it might break the careful composure she was still holding together with both hands. So she said nothing yet, and he did not seem to need her to. Then something shifted in the cabin, quietly and gradually, the way a room changes when someone opens a window and fresh air comes in. One of the flight attendants, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, who had been working the back of the plane during the whole exchange, came up the aisle and stopped at their row. She had clearly heard at least part of what happened because she looked at Lisa with an expression that was not pity. It was something warmer than that, more like recognition, and she crouched down slightly so she was at eye level and asked in a low voice if she could bring anything for the little ones. Lisa started to say no thank you out of pure habit, the reflexive politeness of someone who has spent years not wanting to be a burden to anyone. But the flight attendant was already reaching into her cart and pulling out a small wrapped snack pack and two little sets of wings, the plastic kind they give to kids on flights, and she pressed them gently into Lisa's son's hands with a smile that made the boy's whole face light up. She also brought Lisa a cup of hot tea without being asked, set it carefully on the tray table, and gave her shoulder the briefest, lightest squeeze before moving back up the aisle. It was such a small thing, but small things have a way of landing hard when you are running on empty. A few minutes after that, the woman sitting across the aisle, older, traveling alone, with silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head, leaned over and asked in a soft voice if she could hold the sleeping toddler for a little while so Lisa could eat something. Lisa looked at her, and the woman smiled the way grandmothers smile, like they have seen everything and none of it has made them hard, and Lisa gratefully transferred her daughter into the woman's arms and watched her settle, the child against her chest with the easy confidence of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. Lisa picked up the tea with both hands and just sat for a second, feeling the warmth of the cup, and something in her finally came loose. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly, the way tension leaves a body when it has been holding on for too long. She ate the snack. She drank the tea. Her son, energized by his new plastic wings, turned to the colonel and asked him in a completely serious voice whether he had ever flown a real airplane. The colonel lowered his book and looked at the boy with an expression that was genuinely warm, and said yes, he had flown quite a few of them actually. The boy's eyes went enormous. He had approximately 40 follow-up questions, and the colonel answered every single one of them with patience and detail, and a kind of attention that made the child feel like the most important person in the conversation, which, in that moment, he was. Lisa watched her son talking to this quiet, steady man with his hands flying around, demonstrating takeoff angles and loop maneuvers. And she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not just relief, not just gratitude, but a deep and genuine sense that there are still good people in the world. Ordinary and extraordinary all at once. And that sometimes when everything goes wrong in the same moment, Grace shows up anyway, in the seat right next to you, and taps you gently on the shoulder before you even knew you needed it. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their descent into Los Angeles, and Lisa looked out the window past her. Sun's head at the city spreading out below them in the late afternoon light, all those tiny roads and rooftops and swimming pools catching the sun, and she felt something she had not expected to feel at the end of this flight, which was grateful, not just relieved that it was over, not just glad the hard part was behind her, but genuinely, deeply grateful in a way that sat differently in her chest than the tight, anxious feeling that had lived there for most of the last 5 hours. Her daughter was awake again, calm and soft-faced the way toddlers look after a good sleep, sitting contentedly in the older woman's lap across the aisle and pointing at things out the window with one small finger while the woman named every single thing she pointed at in a patient, steady voice. Her son was still talking to the colonel, or rather he had moved on from airplanes to asking whether the colonel had ever seen a real parachute up close. And the colonel was telling him yes, he had worn one quite a few times. And the look on the boy's face at that answer was something Lisa knew she would remember for a long time. She reached over and touched her son's knee gently, just to feel him there, solid and warm and safe. And he glanced at her and then went right back to his conversation, without missing a beat, the way kids do when they feel completely secure. And that small thing told her everything she needed to know about how the last part of this flight had changed something for him too. As the plane began its final approach and the flight attendants moved through the cabin asking people to return their seats to the upright position, the older woman across the aisle carefully passed the sleeping, no, not sleeping, just quietly content, toddler back to Lisa. And as she did, she held Lisa's hand for just a moment and said, in a low voice, that she was doing a wonderful job and that her children were beautiful. Lisa thanked her and meant it in a way that went far beyond the words. When the wheels finally touched down and the cabin filled with that familiar rush of engine noise and deceleration, a small ripple of applause moved through the rows, the kind that happens on flights sometimes, light and spontaneous, and Lisa found herself smiling into her daughter's hair without even meaning to. As people began to stand and gather their things, something unexpected happened. A man 2 rows ahead, who had not been part of anything that occurred during the flight and had not said a word, turned around and looked at the colonel and simply said thank you. Then the woman behind him nodded and said the same. The flight attendant with the kind eyes came back down the aisle and stopped at their row again, this time just to say, quietly, that it had been a privilege to witness that today. The colonel accepted every one of these small acknowledgments the same way, with a brief nod, a short word, no performance, no pride. Just the quiet ease of a man who was not interested in being made into anything larger than what he was. When Lisa finally stood and began pulling her carry-on down from the overhead bin, the colonel stood beside her and lifted it down for her without being asked, setting it in the aisle, and then he stepped back to let her and the children go first. She turned to face him before she moved, and this time she did not let the moment pass without saying something. She told him she did not know how to properly thank him for what he had done. He shook his head slightly, the same way he had done all those hours earlier when he first reached for his badge, and he told her she had nothing to thank him for. He said that she had gotten on a plane alone with 2 small children and handled everything thrown at her with more composure than most people he had ever known. and that the only thing he had done was say what anyone in that cabin should have said. Then he smiled, a real one, unhurried and warm, and told her to enjoy her visit. She walked off that plane and into the terminal with her son's hand in hers and her daughter on her hip. And she did not cry until she saw her mother waiting at the end of the corridor with open arms. And then she cried in the way you only cry when you are finally somewhere safe. And the person holding you has known you your whole life. And you do not have to explain a single thing.
Thanks for watching my video. Like, subscribe and share.